All right, welcome back to our Foundational Skills mini course. This is Module 3, where we're going to focus on the first part of phonics. And I am Carrie Swanson.
And I am, despite numerous attempts to change, still David Lieben.
Just a reminder that all the resources that you see from us today, plus so many others, are on Achieve the Core, and our organization is hopeful that we are meeting your needs as teachers and those who work with teachers. So our objectives for today are all focused on the first part of phonics.
And that is to identify how phonemic awareness connects to phonics instruction, and also how and why phonics patterns must be addressed sequentially. In other words, there are many programs that do not have a sequence. They go by whatever patterns appear in the books or whatever patterns teachers might choose. And the research is beyond overwhelming that that's not the most effective way to do this.
So we'll be talking a lot about why that's true today. Just a reminder here that the phonics and word recognition bucket are a key area of study across kindergarten, first and second grade. So you can take a minute to refresh your memory on these set of standards, or pause the webinar to look more closely at your grade-specific standards here and thinking about your role. We do know we are focusing on this starting as soon as students are connecting phonemes to the spellings or graphemes that represent the sounds, and continuing to focus on phonics and word recognition throughout first and second grade.
Sometimes it comes up, people ask, why not just do this with one group? Like, why not just have one course for kindergarten, one course for first, one course for second? And there's a couple of reasons why not. One, people may switch the position that they're teaching, but also, more importantly, it's good to know what goes on before students get to you, to understand the importance of phonemic awareness in beginning to read, even if you're only teaching second grade, to understand the importance of letter recognition in kindergarten, even if you're only teaching first or second grade, where letter recognition is, one would hope, well established.
And to understand where your kindergartners are going to be going in first and second grade. Good for understanding the trajectory and also helping you differentiate for your students. So here we're connecting now that active listening from the last module to letters. And you guys talked about that in your discussion over this last week. We know that reading is a process. It's not disconnected parts. And so students who are moving into phonics instruction are making connections between their earlier skills. Learning to decode is actually connecting sounds to graphemes. And we know that if students haven't learned to do this, we've made it more difficult for them. But just to know that these two areas really reinforce one another, but they don't need to be taught in isolation. So if a student is behind in terms of their phonemic awareness, that doesn't mean you should keep them from moving into phonics. You just note that they are going to need more and extra, but these two areas of instruction reinforce the needs of the early readers.
And in addition to them talking to each other, phonemic awareness and phonics talking to each other, you will see that many programs continue with phonemic awareness, certainly through first grade and sometimes even second. And what a lot of programs do is they use it as a warm-up to get kids thinking about sounds and letters. They'll do some phonemic activities as a warm-up, almost like athletes stretch their muscles before a game.
So we want to make sure we have a norms definition of phonics here. Phonics is the relationship between the letters of the written language and the sounds of the spoken language. Phonics is based on the alphabetic principle, which is that letters and letter combinations are symbols, and that those symbols represent speech sounds in words. Or you can say that the sounds of language are represented by letters and letter combinations. Make it really concrete, we've got the word boy, where we know once it's written down, the symbol for B makes the B sound, and the symbols for OY make the OY sound in boy. And David said last week that a nice shortcut for this is just to think that letters are actually pictures of sounds. And when we're teaching letters to kindergartners, often we teach it that way. So these M and S pictures are from the Journeys program. A lot of core programs connect letters to animals or other sort of ways of making the learning kinesthetic for kids, so that they're able to really concretely make that transition from what they hear to what they see.
And just as this works for individual letters, where M is a picture for the sound, it's important to understand that M does not make the sound. It's a picture or a symbol or a representation of the sound and S of the S sound. And in the same way, combinations of letters are pictures of sound. So AI is a picture of the A sound, as in the word paid. And as we move through this, you'll see different combinations of letters, which are pictures of different sounds.
So all of this is connecting phonemic awareness to reading, writing, and spelling. We know that students need to be able to identify and isolate phonemes, and that allows them to hear the sounds that make up language. And once they can hear the sounds that make up language, that'll make it much easier for them to match the language to print, to match those sounds to print. Doing all of this, it's important that students can both decode and encode. So decoding is when students are looking at graphemes on the page, converting those to sounds, and then blending those sounds together to make words. So they're looking at the story, The Big Bad Bat. They're looking at the word bat, and they're going at bat. When they're encoding, they're doing the opposite. They're converting speech sounds of words into graphemes they can write. So they know they want to write bat, they can hear the sounds that make up the word, and they can write BAT. A sort of shortcut for thinking about this is decoding is reading and encoding is writing. It's a lot easier to see evidence of student learning this way because they are literally reflecting what they can read in what they can write.
And sometimes it's easier to say decoding is reading, encoding is spelling. But in either case, it's you write what you spell usually, but you can also spell it orally.
So starting with letter recognition with kindergartners.
In my diving deeper and deeper into foundational skills, one of the studies that surprised me the most was how well established over a number of studies they've been able to connect success with letter recognition in kindergarten, or in some cases first grade, because kindergarten is not required in every state or every school district, to later success with reading. So there's this sense that, well, it's easy, it's the alphabet, and you sing the alphabet song, you have some lessons. Well, it is going to be easy for some kids, and some kids are going to come, a fair number of kids are going to come knowing letters of the alphabet and possibly knowing all of them. But it's important to be sure that every child has accurate and automatic recognition of letters, because our goal is accurate and automatic recognition of words. And if you're stumbling or hesitating on any one letter, you're not going to have that kind of accurate and automatic recognition of a word. I think I may have said this before, and knowing the way I work, I'll probably say it again. But a skilled reader reads a word in a quarter of a second. I mean, close your eyes and try to imagine what a quarter of a second is. That's very hard to do. But on average, that's how skilled readers read words. That's not going to happen unless they read and recognize letters with absolute accuracy and automaticity.
In order to read the words, you're recognizing several letters together as a sequence. And so that sort of level of quickness is pretty mind-boggling. No pressure, just all future reading depends on it. So we want to make sure that that's very clear. So to show a little bit about the related research here for you, we are giving you a little bit of a picture of a study that grouped students following the described instructional delivery method. Group 1 focused instruction first on letter names and then words and words taught as wholes. Group 2 focused on words taught as wholes, followed by letter names and sounds. And group 3 focused on letter names and sounds, and then followed that with words taught as wholes. So I'm going to ask you to make a prediction to yourself which group will score better on a reading achievement test. You can pause the module if you need a minute to think about this, or if you want to talk this out with your colleagues. And we'll go ahead and show you the results here. So the group that focused first on letter names and sounds, and then words taught as a whole, which are often referred to as high frequency words, that group significantly outperformed the other groups. Group 2 was the sort of second here, and the group that didn't connect letters to sounds did the worst. So this is really well summarized by this Marilyn Adams quote, that letter knowledge and phonemic awareness are critical for the beginning reader, but it seems that there's some special magic that lies in the linking of these two basic skills. And when we're doing that, when we're explicitly connecting letter sounds to their graphemes, we're providing students with access to print. So note here, once students have learned these sounds and these graphemes, they can start to write them. And again, they're writing graphemes that match the initial sound of the pictures, because they haven't yet learned to write words like six or monkey, but they can write M and S and connect them to the appropriate pictures of those words, building their access to more and more content. So as we keep going past initial letters and we move into phonics content, the complications really grow. Things get complicated. When we're talking about phonics instruction, we're talking about two things. We're talking about the teaching of sound and spelling patterns, and we're also talking about the systematic teaching of high frequency words. We will be talking about that a lot in a later module. We're talking about right now, we're simply focusing on the sequence of sound and spelling patterns. So to start off, say the words that are on the screen out loud to yourself and try to identify the first phoneme that you hear in the words. You notice that we've got a quick guess. You may have seen a
We're interrupted by a German Shepherd.
So as you're saying the words, you notice that all of these words start with O. And I'll go ahead and do this with you now. Our first word, one, starts with the W sound. On starts with ah. Olive starts with ah. And off starts with ah. And just a little fun fact for you, ah is very close to the short O sound, and some people actually would say that they're indistinguishable. So you can check your own regional dialect right now by saying the word C-O-T and the word C-A-U-G-H-T, and you can see whether you hear a difference. For some people, it's very obvious, and some people's accents actually make those two words sound almost the same.
I would fall into the latter group as a result of growing up only a few blocks from Bernie Sanders in Brooklyn.
So David's accent often makes some of these tasks even more challenging for him, which is true for may be true for some of your learners as well. So students who are second language learners or who speak non-standard English might have more of a challenge when they're identifying the different phonemes in words as they compare to printed words. It's something to keep in mind and to think about accordingly.
I would say that in my case, it often is a problem.
Oh, what phoneme did you hear in David's word there? Often. All right. So to further illustrate some of the complications here, we talked about sounds versus graphemes, and you want to pause the module and see if you can name all of the graphemes that are associated with the E phoneme. There are clearly 8. Pause it and see if you can come up with all 8.
And just in case you haven't picked it up, the grapheme is the spelling.
All the different ways to spell the E sound. So we'll get a chance to see how you did here, revealing the different sound and spelling patterns for the same sound. These materials, as an aside, they come from the Core Knowledge Language Arts curriculum, and they're interesting because below each sound, the bar represents how frequently that sound is found in the English language. So you can see that the Y that makes the E sound at the end of a word is really common spelling, where the IE found at the end of cookie is a much less common spelling. So to further complicate things, we know that many phonemes have multiple graphemes. So this is a illustration of R-controlled vowels, which can help us to see this quite clearly.
An R-controlled vowel being a vowel such as A, E, or O, followed immediately by an R, which makes the pronunciation, as Carrie will show us in a moment, somewhat different. That's an R-controlled vowel, sometimes called a spelling pattern or a vowel team.
Right. So when we're looking at the phoneme for example, that phoneme can be spelled in a lot of different ways. It can be spelled with the letters EA as in earth. It can be spelled with the letters OR as in worm, and it can be spelled with UR as in fur. As a challenge, feel free to pause the module and see if you can list a few more ways to spell this phoneme. There are a lot, and maybe you came up with a few words as an example of this. And also, some graphemes have multiple phonemes, so the reverse is actually true. So for example here, the spelling AR can be pronounced in different ways. So AR can be pronounced R as in cart, or it can be pronounced as in hazard, or it can be pronounced or as in warm. So lots of different complications here as we're thinking about sound and spelling patterns and their relationship to words in the English language. And because this is so complicated, it means we have to build phonics knowledge very carefully. We want to make sure that we are giving it the attention that it deserves. So we do this through systematic phonics, as David has talked about quite a bit by this point. And we also utilize connected text, and we'll talk more about that in the next two modules.
One quick thing, it's recognition that's the issue with phonics. It's not memorization of rules. There are certain high important or high frequent rules that will be taught and that will help children in some cases, but mostly it's a matter of pattern recognition.
Right. So we're building this pattern recognition through a really systematic sequence. So thinking about these complications, we know that there are 52 letters in the alphabet. If we think about both the uppercase and the lowercase letters, and that 16 of those look distinctly different from their lowercase counterparts, right? So if you think about the capital letter A and the lowercase letter A and how different those look. And we know those 52 shapes represent these 44 sounds that we've talked about, and there's also 150 different spellings. And students also have to learn about punctuation and reading from top to bottom and left to right. And so we know that doing this systematically is absolutely helping to ensure that all these discrete skills are addressed very cleanly for students. So we have a pause task for you for this. So what we would like you to do is think about the impact of a scope and sequence here. And you have a sample in your handout. Again, this comes from the resource, The Top 10 Reading Teachers Tools by Deb Glazer. You have a list on the left of sound and spellings that are taught in early kindergarten. And on the right, a list of sound and spellings that are taught in mid or later first grade. And just a note, once the students have been taught those first grade skills that are referenced there on the slide, they've also learned all of the consonants and short vowels and basic long vowels already. What we'd like you to do is generate a word list. One for early K and one for mid to late first grade of somewhere between 10 to 20 words that a student should be able to decode and encode based on this systematic teaching. Once you have made those word lists, you can start up the slide deck once again. So we wanted to also just illustrate this in terms of the goal of this systematic teaching and how it impacts students' ability to read over time. So I'm going to show you on the slides a text. This is a 9th grade text. The Short and Happy Life of Francis Maycomer, and these slides come from Unbound Ed. And the text is going to change colors based on the kindergarten, first, and second grade learning that would happen through phonics. When it turns red, it'll indicate a taught kindergarten set of skills. When it turns gold, it'll be first grade. When it turns green, it's second grade. And then blue is going to represent those words that have become recognizable on site over time because of exposure to the content. They no longer need to be decoded by the students. So you can see that what happens is the text turns quite red. There's lots of sound and spelling patterns that are taught in kindergarten. And first grade builds on this. And as we continue with very systematic sound and spelling patterns, you can see kindergarten, first, and second grade takes care of the bulk of the print on this page. Not everything, but most of it. And words become memorized as there's more exposure to the content and more reading. And once students are reading even the same text over time, some of the words like names or places that are less recognizable become recognizable to the students, till we're left with just some rich vocabulary words and some rich content words that we know are really important to instruction at higher levels. But over time, through really systematic materials that are sequenced well, students are able to access more and more print. So our takeaway here is that sequence matters.
I love this cartoon every time I see it.
So we also hear people talking about students who didn't need this, right? So students like my daughter who learned to read through exposure to reading and maybe didn't have this kind of explicit phonics instruction. So David, do you want to talk to
Yes.
that point a little bit?
It's important, and we'll probably say it more than once. There are some children who are going to pick this up very fast. They don't need this kind of systematic instruction. But what the research shows us again and again is that to get everybody to be able to decode and read with fluency, and really 99-point-something% of the population can. It's only children who have a severe disability who cannot end up by the third grade reading with fluency with the proper instruction. And some kids will need less time, less support, less systemization, etc., and some will need more. But what characterizes a structured phonics program is it gets everybody to the point of fluency at the second or third grade level. So the idea is to get that everybody, not just to focus on and to say, well, we don't really need this because we have certain kids who don't need it this much. And it's true, there are those kids. So then the question comes up, well, does it hurt those kids to have this systemization? Well, it doesn't hurt them for two reasons. Number one, some programs are going to differentiate and they're going to move faster. Number two, the research shows that when children who are natural at this or much better at this initially get this kind of program, they become better spellers, and that's not a bad thing, even in the age of spell check.
So it benefits all, like we've talked about before. We know there are outliers. We know there are students who are always going to be outliers with any instructional program, but teaching is the hardest job in the world. So our goal is to make sure that we are being efficient and making good choices and making the choices that maximize the impact in the classroom. When David said that probably 99% of students can read without difficulty by third grade, we know that that does not match what we see in our country's classrooms right now. And so we want to look at how to get them there, how to make a dent in this important work. So good news about any of the programs that you might be using in your classroom, which is that most of these programs can do this work for us, David, right? There's not kind of a huge caution there.
Right. They're good. If you get a program which is a systematic or structured phonics program, they're all going to do this. When the only time it becomes tricky is with the basals, and I think we talked about this in the opening session. The basals, in fact, do have a pretty systematic phonics program. Some publishers are better than others, no doubt. But the problem with the basals, as I think we also discussed, is that they have you do absolutely everything in the world. And so the time and attention and repetition that is needed to get all students to this level of success does not happen. And that's why those programs fail, despite having a fairly systematic or structured phonics program. And then, of course, there's other programs that have nothing like that. And the number of kids coming out of those areas who cannot read with fluency in the 3rd grade is astounding, as we also discussed in our opening session.
Right. So there's not a research base for one scope and sequence over another. Following one is what the research proves. And we will talk a little bit more about how to do this and what modifications you might need to make in the next module. So there are definitely better instructional materials and worse instructional materials, but the idea is to be following that scope and sequence to really be systematic. So for your online discussion, as we've been talking about this, some of you may have felt more or less comfortable with this idea that David's talked about, that not using a systematic scope and sequence and instead approaching phonics through individualized instruction that helps unpack specific books for readers in groups, maybe in guided reading, that is going to present some challenges. We've named that. We are saying it is going to present some challenges, but we want to hear more from you about what those challenges might look like. So we gave you a scenario that may or may not look similar to the approach you use in your classrooms or your schools. It may look very similar to some of you, it may look very different to others. And we'd like to hear you discuss what unintentional challenges may happen from teaching students phonics that is rooted in the book they're going to read, but that isn't systematic across the course of the school year. And we really hope that we can talk about this and have a good dialogue online around this work and what that really means for instruction. So we look forward to talking about this more in office hours this week. Once again, we have some recommended reading. This time we showed some slides this week from our partner organization, Unbound Ed. So we have their guide to kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade for you to take a look at. We also have our reminders about the resources on Achieve the Core and the value of the Core Advocate Network. And one more time, just a plug for staying connected to us and making sure that we can hear about the great work that you all are doing and that you're able to share our resources that are, if they're valuable, share them with the field. So thank you again, and we look forward to talking more in office hours and sharing the next module next week.